Welcome to episode 299 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourScreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing Anderson Cowan, who just did an indie dramedy. He's a true independent filmmaker and he shares his story with us today, so stay tuned for that interview. Just a quick update as well. Last week I mentioned that I would be interviewing Nathan Ives to talk about his new film. Well, that's been pushed back by a week, so I will have Nathan on next week. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 299. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents and managers and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing writer-director Anderson Cowan. Here is the interview. Welcome, Anderson, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Thanks for having me, Ashley. This is fun.
So to start out, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
Sure, yeah. Born and raised in Los Angeles. I'm sure that that's kind of a rarity for you. I would imagine that most people you talk to are from other parts of the country.
Yeah.
But I was born into it, which was, I guess, convenient. I think we all at one time or another love movies, right? For the most part. So I'm not going to tell you like, oh, I've loved movies since I was a kid, and I knew I wanted to make movies ever since I was a kid. What happened with me was kind of interesting. My dad, he was a therapist. A psychologist, and he didn't practice what he preached at all, and he did things that were very inappropriate looking back on it. He took me to many R-rated movies at a very young age. I'm talking like 6, 7 years old. He was taking me to like hard R movies, and it was traumatizing. And I spent a lot of time in theaters with my dad as a child, with my face literally buried in the back of the seat in the theater, just wanting the movie to end. I'll never forget when he took me to see The Thing. I think I was like 8 years old or something, and John Carpenter's The Thing like scarred me, and then
really,
and then his psychology instincts kicked in once the movie was over. Like I just wanted to get the hell out of there. Once the movie was over, he made me stay and watch the credits, and he was like saying, "See, look, all these people made the movie, made that fake movie," and I'm like, I'm well aware that it's fake, Dad. It doesn't mean that it's not horrifying to me, but things traumatize you as a child. When you get older, I think a lot of us try and master those things and make them our own. And I definitely think that has a lot to do with what happened with me.
Huh, yeah, you're scaring me a little bit. I have a 9 and a 6-year-old, and I do let them sometimes watch, rated R horror movies, so maybe I should reconsider that.
No, I think it's challenged by choice, as they used to say at the camp that I was a counselor at for many years, challenged by choice. So I wasn't like forced. He didn't force me to go see these. I remember going to drive-ins with him and just spending most of the movie on the floorboard because I didn't want to see what was happening on the screen. But I did, in a sense, feel like I was trapped in the theater. I think if you're doing it in the comfort of your own home and they can, look away when they want or stop it or whatever, that's a different story.
Yeah. So I thought I showed my kids The Shining. I thought they would get bored with it after a few minutes, and they were absolutely riveted by it.
Really?
Yeah. So it's a good litmus test for really great films if your 6-year-old can stay entertained by it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's dig into your latest film, Groupers. To start out, maybe you can give us a quick logline or pitch. What is that film all about?
It's really about hypocrisy and group thinking and group mentality, and homophobia is gay is the ultimate message, I guess. It's about Meg, who is a young girl in her young 20s, and she's got a little brother who's in high school who's been getting bullied for a number of years, and she comes up with a plan to go and kidnap her little brother's two abusers, these two high school jocks. and she picks them up at a bar. They think that they're going home with her to have fun, but she's got other plans. She takes them back to an abandoned house with an empty pool in the backyard, and she strings them up after subduing them. She strings them up, and they wake up in the morning face to face, all tied together. And ultimately, what she tells them is that they have to become gay for each other for her to let them go, because they've been saying that homosexuality is a choice.
I gotcha. And that's interesting. And I want to point out to the listeners here too, I love your pitch there. You started with sort of the macro pitch, which is sort of the theme and stuff, and then got down to the very specifics of the story. I think that's an excellent pitch and sounds like a riveting story. Where did this idea come from? What was the genesis of it?
It all began with a conversation I was having with a friend about Chinese finger traps, and I was asking where they've gone. I used to see them all the time in like party favors when I was a kid at birthday parties and stuff, and I'm like, it's funny when you become an adult, certain things just disappear. And my friend, who's a bit sophomoric, he immediately suggested putting I'll keep it PG here, but he said, hey, I just thought of a great torture device if you used a Chinese finger trap and you put men's genitalia in either end. And I thought it was absurd and ridiculous, but then I immediately thought, but what if those two guys were homophobic, and the only way to get out of it is to get out. We all know how to get out of a Chinese finger trap. They have to, become interested in one another in order to get out of that dilemma. It was ridiculous. It was small, but then it got me thinking, and I went home that night and started writing some of these ideas that I had down about hypocrisy and the fact that a lot of homophobes end up being gay once the cat's out of the bag years down the road, like a lot of politicians that happen. So I was going in with that, guys.
Why do you think this was interesting to you? Like, why do you think that appealed to you as a thing, this idea of groupthink and how maybe damaging to society is? Obviously the sort of the right-wing backlash against homosexuality. Why was that something that interested you?
Yeah, that kind of thing has always interested me, Ashley. I've always been a bit of an outlier and kind of felt comfortable being on the outside looking in and pushing people's buttons and not going along. I've never really felt comfortable with going along, and I don't know where it all started. It could have started with learning about World War II and the Holocaust, and just having such a disdain for humanity that not to get too deep and on my stump here, but when I see an entire society just go along with like one man's horrible thought process, it's like I hate that in humanity, when we're just like, oh, that's the norm, that's what we're gonna do, okay, that's what we do. So being that kind of having that kind of mentality in school, I wore makeup. I was a punk rock kid, and I got beat up a lot for being gay, and I'm not gay, but a lot of people thought I was, and a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, but I know that a few of my attackers turned out to be gay later in life. I learned that they were gay, and it's like interesting. So I wanted to kind of point that out. This is a comeuppance movie, where I hopefully have painted some individuals who the audience really does not like, and then we get to see them humiliated and shamed, and it's satisfying.
Yeah. So you've done a number of other films, and I'm curious, what was your thinking process just in terms of like the financing and the business decisions? Did that play into any of this, or this is just, this is something that you thought was interesting, and as an artist you wanted to bring it into the world? But was there some conversations with a distributor saying, hey, do you think you could actually sell this movie? Did you make some decisions about how much money to spend on this movie based on those business decisions? Maybe talk through a little bit of that, or was it just purely something that interested you?
Well, I've been writing for decades now, literally years. I worked in radio for too long. In fact, it was a cush job, and it breeds complacency, and I was just making good money and not really doing anything with my film career other than writing. And I was constantly creating with pen and paper because it's cheap. It's super cheap. And I was keeping my mind going in that direction. The dream was always to make a feature film, make feature films, I should say. Mm-hmm. But I don't like the idea of sitting down at a table with a pen and paper and thinking I'm going to write something cheap enough that I can make it on my own. And I never let myself do that. But Groupers, when I came up with the idea for Groupers, that was the first thing that I actually had passion about that was actually cheap. Like, really, I knew I could make it for $100,000 or less if I had found one location, worked with non-union actors, and that's why I decided to do groupers first. And the hope is that this springboards into the next one that'll cost a little more. Like the next one costs $1 million, and then the one after that's probably more like a $15 million movie. But yeah, I got a comeuppance trilogy that I have all written out, and I'm ready to go with it. But obviously you start with the cheapest one first, and the other movies. I went to film school back like at the turn of the century. God, it makes me sound old. But I graduated film school back then, and you learn a lot. It's mainly you make connections in film school. But unfortunately, when you get out of film school, you're all each other's competition immediately as soon as you graduate. So did not have a whole lot of connections coming out of film school, and a few years went past, and I decided to find volunteers to help me make shorts. And I made 5 shorts in 1 year, in 12 months. I made 5 shorts, and that was kind of like film school part 2, and that really I think honed my wherewithal for being on set and running an actual feature set.
I gotcha.
But no, I did not. To answer your question, I did not talk to any distributors, and I learned so much from doing this one. And you absolutely should have a business plan before you sit down and raise $1. I did not do that.
Yeah, I got you. So let's talk about your writing process a little bit. Just a couple quick questions. Where do you typically write? Coffee shop, home office? And when do you typically write? Do you write in the morning, afternoon? Are you one of the guys that writes in the middle of the night?
Yeah, I'm a middle of the night guy. I've written a ton of stuff in bars, a lot of pages in bars. I'll be the guy at the end of the bar. Not so much these days because I'm a stay-at-home dad, so I don't get that kind of luxury. But I wrote the majority of things that I've written have been in bars or coffee shops or in my car. The first draft is always pen to paper. That's always my first draft. And then the second draft is I transfer it into final draft, which I'm sure that all of your listeners are familiar with final draft. And then it's just one pass after another. And I'm sure you've heard writing is rewriting, and I totally agree with that. And usually I do at least 8 to 15 passes before I let anyone look at it.
And what does that look like in terms of an outline? How much time do you spend before you actually open up final draft?
It depends on groupers. Was different. It took me longer to write groupers, and it's funny because I got in my head about it because I realized on page 30 probably that, like I said, it was cheap enough that I'm like, I'm probably going to make this. It's not just fantasy. I'm not just writing for the fun of writing, and I never really let myself fantasize about the other ones that one day these are going to be made into films. Groupers, it kind of got me intimidated of the process because I'm like, everything I'm writing is probably going to be on the screen at some point. This is real. And then everything became precious and everything had to be perfect, and it took me a lot longer. So that one probably took a good 2 months for the first draft to even get written on the paper. And I did some work on myself. I read a book that I highly recommend called The Art of War, The War of Art. I don't know if you're familiar with that, sure, but that was a great motivator. And then I saw, it's funny, I saw this movie called Buzzard, which anyone can see. It's on Amazon Prime. It's streaming with your membership, and I loved it. And it's not a perfect movie by any means, but I love that movie, and it had such an effect on me, and it freed me up. I'm like, there's so many problems with that movie, and it's so low budget, but I absolutely, and that somehow freed me up to kind of just go forward with groupers and not have to make everything perfect.
I gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned that you'll do this 8 or 15 passes before you let anybody see it. So let's talk a little bit about your development process. Once you've done those 8, 10, 12, 15 passes, you feel confident with the script. What does your development process look like? Do you have a number of friends that are writers or in the industry? How do you disseminate, and then how do you get notes back, and what do you do with those notes?
Yeah, I try and find people from all over, all different walks of life, people that are in the business that also write, make movies. I have some friends that do that and that I have read it for me. I have my wife, who doesn't really care for movies, read it for me. I have my mom actually do a proof of it for spelling errors, because I don't want to be embarrassed because I'm an atrocious speller. But I try and get people from all walks of life to give me their initial reactions. And what I'm looking for with their notes is alignment. I'm looking for people to, 2 or 3 of let's say 5 to 10 people that I have read it, if I'm lucky enough to have that many. Let me just say this too to your audience. there's going to be people who won't bother to read your script, and that's okay. It's I always go, if somebody doesn't read it once I give it to them, and they'll, hey, let me read your script, I'll be like, okay, here it is, and then I don't hear from them for 6 months. Like, I've lost friends because they don't want to read it, and they don't want to talk to me about not reading it. But I immediately go to, they've read it, they hate it, and they don't know how to look me in the eye anymore because it's so bad. And that's not the case. A lot of time people are just busy. It feels like homework. So don't do what I do, which is always go to the worst possible scenario, because I don't think that is the case. But what I'm looking for is, like, 2 or 3 of the people to all have a problem with motivation of a character, or tell me that something's very unbelievable or something just doesn't feel right. And if there's 2 or 3 people that are all green on something, that's usually there's something to that.
How do you approach screenplay structure? There's the sort of very template, Blake Snyder and Sid Field, and I know a lot of writers are maybe a little more free form. How do you approach screenplay structure?
I'm very free form. Because I watch too many more movies, probably. That could be part of the problem. And it kills me when I'm an hour into a movie and I realize that I just watched the end of Act 2 because the protagonist is farther away from the goal than ever before, and it looks like all hope is lost. And then at that moment in the theater, I'm like, okay, that means I got about another 30 minutes of this movie to watch our protagonist, our hero, get back on the horse and kill the bad guy. I don't like seeing movies that way that are so cookie cutter. So I don't really follow that. I try and visualize it and imagine myself sitting in the theater watching as I'm writing it, and if I'm going to continue being interested as that viewer, as almost like an out-of-body experience, then I know I'm going in the right direction. But no, I've read the Sid Fields, I've done the work, and I've even written a couple screenplays that do follow that form, but I don't have any interest in making them.
I gotcha. Okay, so now you're done with the screenplay. You have a draft. You've gotten notes. What are those next steps to going out and actually getting this produced? Did you have the financing in place? You self-financed? Did you have a producer? Maybe just talk a little bit about that. What does that look like, actually going from script to production?
Yeah, so once I had this one done and I realized that there was no giant set pieces, no explosions, no massive special effects, I went out and I had a couple people that I've met over the years that you hear things here and there that they produce or this and that. So one guy in particular, I just called a meeting, and we went and we had lunch, and I told him I had a script and I wanted to make it, and I wanted to see if he'd be interested in producing it. And he said, let me read it. And then he got back to me like later that night, and he's like, yes, let's do this. So that was my very first thing, and I think that's really an important step as a writer or director, is to get a strong producer to team up with, like, very soon, before you even start raising money. Because Max Landworth, my producer, who I just happen to know, he was a friend of a friend. It was one of those things, and he had produced shorts before and one feature film before. So he, not a ton of experience, but enough that he's identified a few of the pitfalls, and he had some really great advice, and he set me up with a social media crowdfunding coach named Justin Giddings, and that was step 2. And then I worked with him for 6 weeks, and that guy, he took, I think it was some money up front, and then he takes a percentage of whatever you raise. And I chose Seed and Spark, which is a little bit of an off the map crowdfunding site, but I'm really fortunate in the sense that I've been talking about movies to an audience for the past over 10 years now, every week on the Film Vault. And then I have another film show called Cinematics. So I leaned on that audience heavily, and thank God they responded. And we set out to raise $75,000, and we raised just shy of $85,000. So, and then once they give it to you and everyone gets their cuts and you start paying off the perks, it's more like $60,000. But then I did a lot of out-of-pocket stuff that my wife still doesn't know about.
So I got you. And maybe you can just give us a couple of quick tips. You had this coach who was helping you.
Yeah.
What are some tips for people? If people are thinking, okay, I'm going to go out and do a Kickstarter, Seed and Spark crowdfunding campaign, maybe just a couple of quick tips for those people.
Yeah, for sure. So number one is engagement with the audience. And the more you're engaging with the audience, the more likely they are to want to see you succeed and help you out and be a part of this exciting thing that you're doing, which is making a movie. So you got to start there, even if it's just friends and family. You got to make sure you got the engagement going. And once you do start the campaign, it's every single day, and you have different little contests and different themes. Like Monday, I can't remember. It's been 2.5, 3 years now. But like every Monday we do like the same theme, and then every Tuesday we do the same thing. Like Throwback Thursday is like a type of theme that people are familiar with. But perhaps the most important thing, if you're going to be looking to raise money, because it is so saturated, I'm sure you talk about it on your show all the time, it's such a different playing field than it was just a few years ago as far as raising money. Like everybody is raising money for something now. Everyone's looking for, I don't want to call it a handout, but I mean that's kind of what it is. And in order to break through, I think you really need to have a hook. You really need to have a niche audience that you are able to identify and target. And with my movie, the hook, which I kind of danced around a little bit, but it's a pretty absurd hook, which is, homophobes snarled in a Chinese finger trap as a torture device for their manhood. And we had a lot of fun around that. And people they were excited. They're like, how in the world can someone make a movie about that? You know what I mean? And also the gay community was a targeted like niche audience that was something that we thought about and kind of planned around and continue to do so with promotion and whatnot. You want to have a niche, and I've heard the term "the riches are in the niches," and I think that's true. I've heard stories of like a woman raising money for a hiking documentary, and she had a very small footprint on social media, but she tapped into this hiking world, and there's so many people that have such a passion for hiking that they really wanted to see a documentary about this thing that they love so much, and she raised a ton of money. So you really got to have a hook and a niche and a target. Making a rom-com that kind of seems like something Meg Ryan would have been in the 90s is probably not the smartest way to go for your first one.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned too your audience, Film Ball, and you said another one. Are these podcasts or these blogs? What are those? And maybe give a little background on that. Number one, we can pitch them, people can go check them out. But also, I'd just be curious to hear how that actually related to raising the money on Kickstarter.
Yeah, Film Vault was because I worked on Loveline for years and years and years in radio, and that's where it kind of started. The guy that was a phone screener for Loveline way back in the day kept asking me to stay after the show. The show ended at midnight, and he kept trying to get me into the studio to do this like fake show that he had an idea for, a movie related, where we do our top 5, explosions, top 5, cold scenes, and through inertia, attrition, I should say, I just finally said, okay, let's just do this. I'll sit down with you, because I knew how the equipment worked. And I turned on the mics and actually quite enjoyed talking about movies to nobody. It was just he and I, we were recording it. But and then we did like 5 or 6 of those, and then he shopped it around a little bit, and then we ended up doing it on HD radio for a couple years, and then we launched on the ACE network, Adam Carolla's podcast network, and immediately had a built-in audience through Carolla, which was great, and we've been doing it ever since. And every single week we open the show where we talk about the 2 or 3 most recent movies we saw, usually like one in theaters and then one from a while ago. And then we do our top 5 list, and that has been great. I mean, it's kept me sharp. It's kept me, watching movies, which is my favorite thing to do, other than make them. And then I started a more serious one where I keep it clean. I don't cuss, and I do that with an actual Broadcast Film Critic Association member named Greg Serzavasti. That's called Cinematics, and we do more deep dives on smaller independent movies that don't get any coverage.
I gotcha. Okay, perfect. So that's fascinating. And to me, that seems like the biggest component. A lot of people, when they're asking me about Kickstarter, obviously your example of the hiker is a great example where someone niches down and they tap into someone with an audience. But I'm always skeptical if someone tries to run a Kickstarter and they don't have an audience already in place. It can be a real uphill battle.
Yeah, I don't know what I would have done, honestly, without, and I don't want to say that I did these shows to get to a place where I could lean on them. In fact, when I first decided to start making the shorts again, I went to the audience, but I went to them to help me on set. Actually, I went on the shows and said, hey, I'm making a number of shorts this year. Anybody who wants to, PA, or if you have any experience in the business, you want to help out. Didn't ask for a dime. I wanted to make friendships, connections, and then with the second round, that's when I went after the money. And back to the engagement, I spend probably an hour or so a day answering emails, and I really enjoy it. I wouldn't suggest you do this if you don't enjoy it, but I do private emails with my listeners every single day, and I think most of those are the people that, if they had enough interest in what you do to email you personally and privately, not like, something on Twitter or Facebook, but something intimate. And then when you respond, and I get a lot of great movie recommendations and ideas, and it's really fun engaging with the audience in that way.
Yeah. So I just want to hear your thoughts on, so now you've raised the money and you're going into production. At some point you found your location. Maybe talk a little bit about the rewrites, or if you even had to do any rewrites. Once you actually had your location, your actors and stuff, and it becomes really apparent what assets you have in place. Did you have to go back and then do another pass on the script to kind of tweak it, make it work more for the location?
No, I was really, really lucky because I had this idea that, sorry, there's a leaf blower coming. I don't know if it's going to pick up, but my neighbor's got the gardeners going. I had this scenario. I had this dream scenario that we were going to have a ton of different houses to choose from. I just needed an empty house with an empty pool in the backyard, or a pool that we could drain. And we found exactly one location that actually worked, that we were allowed to use. So. And I just got really lucky because the pool was in the same place that I wrote it in the script, and the windows in the house were in the same place in comparison to the pool. So I just got really lucky there. What I did do, though, is you do a table read, which is always a lot of fun. You get all the cast together and you videotape that, and you have them read it all the way out. I'm sure that everyone's familiar with the table read. Mm-hmm. And then I had a number of gay people working on the movie, as well as cast. I shouldn't say a number of the cast, but a few of the cast members were gay as well. And I really leaned on them to make sure that I wasn't misstepping and saying anything wrong or offensive, because I'm not, heavily involved. And I have a lot of gay friends, but it's not like I'm well versed in that, in the culture with, it's pretty easy to misstep when you're talking about these kinds of things. So I did get some really good notes on a couple things, and we ended up changing just minor dialogue things so that it wasn't misconstrued.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to touch on something you said earlier about you had this job in radio, you were making good money, but you became complacent. Maybe talk, because I get a lot of emails from people that are in exactly that situation where they have these dreams of being a screenwriter or director or whatever, and they're sort of stuck in this job. Maybe you can talk through just the practical aspects of, how much money you saved, what did you actually do, and what did that actually look like the day you walked out of that job? What was that first day without a job? Did you just start writing? Did you start producing these shorts? And then even just some of the more philosophical questions. I mean, you even kind of made a joke about spending money on the short or on the feature film, and your wife doesn't know about it. Certainly there must have been, there's some family obligations. You're leaving this job, no income in sight. Maybe just talk through some of that, because I know there's people that are wrestling with this right now, and they could probably use, a little of your
little pick me up.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you this. It's not easy on relationships at all, and I'm living proof of that. We have a 2-year-old, and the wife is she's a social worker, and there's a lot of people that I've met that are in the business, the entertainment business, who have their partner is in the polar opposite field. And that is the case with me for sure. My wife is a social worker, a very stable job, and she's got a pension and 401k. I have none of that. And, she's looking at me and looking at her watch going, when's this going to happen? You've been toiling with this for quite some time. Loveline went forever. Like, it was one of the longest radio shows on ever. And it ended in March of 2016. My wife was 3 months pregnant with her first child, and the timing was pretty bad. And I guess what a normal person probably would have done, Ashley, is went out and found like a 9-to-5 immediately with benefits and all that. And instead, I had already written groupers. Thankfully, I had been writing that entire time, so I did have quite a collection of screenplays and treatments and whatnot ready to go, or at least in the process. And I immediately, that's right around the same time that I went out and got my producer and said, you know what, if this is ever going to happen, it has to happen now. So I had saved some money, and I was able to live off of that, and I was getting paid with a couple of podcasts a little bit. That's when I put it all together and actually took a swing, because I realized that if it wasn't going to happen right then, it never was going to happen. And I wish that I had done it 5-10 years earlier, but honestly, I don't think I had the audience then, and I don't think I would have been able to raise the money needed. And I didn't have the idea then either. It all kind of just came to a head, and I was really fortunate to have the screenplay written that was as cheap as it was.
Yeah. So no, that's great advice. So how can people see Groupers? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be like?
Yeah, it's going to be a theatrical release out here in LA, starting September 27th. It's playing for at least a week at the Lemley Music Hall in Beverly Hills, which is pretty cool because I've been seeing movies there since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I'd love to be able to say that my dad took me to an R-rated movie there when I was really young, but I don't have a memory of that place with him. But yeah, and then October 1st, it's doing one of these one-night engagement in 5 separate cities. October 1st at 7:30, New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Washington D.C., and San Francisco. And we have to hit we have a threshold for the screenings to actually happen. And you can just go to groupersthemovie.com. I also have the cold open on there. You can see the abduction scene, the opening of the movie where she abducts the 2 jocks. That's on groupersthemovie.com, as well as where you can buy tickets for those screenings.
I got you. Perfect. And that's my last question. What's the best way for people to keep up with you? Twitter, Facebook, a blog. I will get groupersthemovie.com. I'll put that in the show notes. But anything, if you're on Twitter, Facebook, or a blog, we can get that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, AndersonCowan.com is another place where you can find me. And Anderson at Anderson Cowan's my email. I also started a new feed. I have it in the same RSS feed as my cinematic show, which is a review show. But the new feed that I'm doing weekly is called I've Got a Movie to Make, and I'm talking about the entire process, everything that I'm doing leading up to making the movie, kind of some of the things that we talked about today, as well as the marketing that's happening now. I'm talking about real-time stuff. I started that 14 weeks ago, and it has a dead date of 116 weeks. If I don't make the next movie within 116 weeks, the wife and I are moving out of state. We're done with LA. So it's got like an expiration date on that feed, 116 weeks, and we're 14 weeks in.
I got you. I have confidence you'll make another movie in the next 2 years.
Thank you, Ashley.
Well, perfect. I really appreciate Anderson coming on and talking with me. This is a fascinating interview. I wish you the best of luck with this film, and of course, you're always welcome once you finish your next film.
Thanks so much, Ashley. I love what you do, and I think it's really important. It's great that people have a resource, and if I didn't have the kid and I was a little bit younger, I would absolutely be down there in Sherman Oaks doing some of your writing workshops.
Oh yeah, perfect. Well, I appreciate it, Anderson. We'll talk to you later.
All right, buddy. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, character, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write your logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline and synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your screenplay gets a recommend or a consider from one of our readers, you get to list the screenplay in the SYS Select database, which is a database for producers to find screenplays and a big part of our SYS Select program. Producers are in the database searching for material on a daily basis, so it's another great way to get your material in front of them. As a further bonus, if your script gets a recommend from one of our readers, your screenplay will get included in our monthly Best Of newsletter. Each month we send out a newsletter that highlights the best screenplays that have come through our script analysis service. This is a monthly newsletter that goes out to our list of over 400 producers who are actively looking for material. So again, this is another great way to get your material out there. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing my good friend and often writing partner, Nathan Ives. I mentioned all of this last week as well. He was on episode number 18 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. So if you haven't listened to that, it might be worth checking that out. We talk more about his background. I will link to that in the show notes. Again, as mentioned from last week, he just did a really cool documentary about artists who aren't super famous but are making a living from their art. Hopefully this is something that is of interest to you. I know as an artist myself, it was fascinating to watch and fascinating to hear his process on making this film. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.